Welcome to Out of the Lab, a podcast interviewing entrepreneurs who've taken research out of the lab and built it into a company that's serving the world. These entrepreneurs are heroes, and the planet needs more of them. So tune in, learn from their successes and failures, and get inspired. Visit bountiful.work to join our community and realize your power to save the world. Hello and welcome to Out of the Lab. I'm your host, Max Finder. Today's guest is Alex Reed. He is the co-founder and president of Fluence Analytics. They are a manufacturer of industrial and laboratory monitoring solutions, producing continuous data streams related to polymers and biopharmaceuticals and polymerization. They are able to measure a bunch of different things in the polymer production process, which was previously unmeasurable. So Alex is actually the son of the inventor Wayne Reed, who is a tenured professor at Tulane University, where he runs the polymer poly-RMC lab. And Alex, who does not have a technical background, but now has multiple patents where he is a named inventor on them, he essentially took a technology that his father had invented, licensed out to an industry partner, which was then subsequently returned to the lab. Alex then decided, let's make a business out of this. And it's a really inspiring story of how Alex built this business from the ground up, raised initial funding, did SBIR grants, built the team. They're now a 25-person team selling into multiple markets and applications. They've raised $13 million from institutional venture capitalists like Energy Innovation Capital and strategic investors like Mitsubishi Chemical Holdings. It's a really inspiring story. Alex talks a lot about lessons learned, the importance of the team, the importance of going and talking to customers as early as possible. In fact, one of their customers was the client that originally paid for some of the initial prototyping work and the initial unit, the commercialized units. So Alex really built this company from the ground up, and it's a deep technology startup, which he learned how to do, as he said, in trial by fire. So just simply from experience. He discusses the importance of bringing experts around the table, talking about their chairman, Bill Bottoms, who is a experienced venture capitalist and technologist in the semiconductor space, who really provided a lot of guidance to Alex early on and continues to do so to this day. And the CTO of the company was the grad student that had worked with Professor Wayne Reed on the technology originally. So it really emphasizes the importance of the team and how Alex was able to pull all of these resources and people together to form what is an exciting technology company today. So enjoy the episode. Visit bountiful.work, W-O-R-K, to join our community. And thanks for tuning in. Alex, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Max. Happy to be here.
So I'd love to get started with the poly-RMC R&D Center. It seemed like that's sort of where you got your commercialization origin and founded Fluence Analytics out of that R&D Center. So can you tell us a little bit about what you did there? And it seemed like you had a business role there and ended up building this technology company from there. So I'd love to hear about the origin story from that.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, the commercialization aspect out of a university is always, for me, the most interesting part. How do you take the research and actually make it, quote unquote, useful for somebody in the market? So at Tulane University in New Orleans, there was this research center, and it actually was run by my dad, who's a physics professor at Tulane, and he's actually the inventor of our technology. So I grew up working in the lab very young, became very interested in technology, and learned a lot about instrumentation and some of the stuff we do today, and quickly gravitated more towards that commercial side. So I actually graduated school during the Great Recession with an economics degree. I'd done some work in finance, and approached my dad. Like, it's not a great market to look for a job anyway. You've been telling me about these technologies and how you want to do something with them. Why don't we start a business? He just laughed at me because obviously I was young and didn't know what I was doing. But he's like, well, if you could figure it out, go for it. I was like, I'll figure it out. So anyway, so that was, if you look at what you need to commercialize technology, it was, the entrepreneur, in this case, the young and dumb entrepreneur, with the scientists and the technology, partnered up. And then our CTO at the time, Mike Trensky, was his grad student. So he joined, and then the biggest other piece that we had was our chairman, Dr. Bill Bottoms, who is a pretty well-known venture capitalist in the Bay Area, did a lot of work in the semiconductor space and all kinds of, he was a VC, and then he did a bunch of startups as an entrepreneur and an executive of some public companies. So that mentorship for someone like me, an executive with no experience was critical. So unless you have someone with experience, partnering up with someone like that will certainly help the development and avoid a lot of the common mistakes.
So had your dad not commercialized anything to that point when you started bugging him about the opportunity?
Actually, no, he did. So there was a small instrument he had developed that he had licensed out to an established company, which is one of the other routes. Rather than doing a startup, you just take a technology and you license it to either a big pharma company, or in this case, a small instrumentation company. And so he licenses this product out, and it did pretty well. They sold some systems. So we had actually looked at licensing this other technology. We did. It went through an acquisition, and then the license was returned, which is what prompted me to ask. He's like, well, we could license this back out to some other company. I said, well, why would we do that? Why don't we do it ourselves? So that's really what prompted it. So he had some success with traditional licensing, but this time we wanted to drive it to avoid, or basically to be in control of the development and deployment.
And you were involved in that original license deal, or you were bugging him at the time of its return? Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So it had happened while I was too young to do anything. And then by the time I was graduating, that license was returned, and that was the opportunity. I said, look, the market's bad for finance. I can help you build this research center. So I originally started working with them there to basically bring in more commercial contracts to the university, because the technologies were so interesting. We had our customers, petrochemical and pharma companies, funding research to basically develop the technology while it was still in the university. So I helped with that side, but I said, I'll do that as long as we can then do a company, and he had agreed to that. And so then we did, SBIR route. We started to go down the path of how do we fund it after a little bit of time, working with some customers.
And so you saw some of those sponsored research agreements with the petrochemical and pharmaceutical companies. I mean, that was money that was, like you just said, I think, sponsoring the research that your dad was doing in the lab. I mean, did they have any kind of claim onto the the commercialized products that might come from that research, or from any licenses, or they had a first right of refusal, anything like that you can touch on?
Yeah, excellent question, Max. That's definitely something to watch for. We always negotiated to retain rights around our IP. So because we had existing IP and technology, what we did was we basically said, look, anything that improves what we already have, our patent estates and our technology will be ours. Anything that would improve your chemistry would be yours. So we were fortunate in that we were developing hardware, software, analytics tools that a chemical company would not be interested in commercializing anyway. So I think the challenge is, if you're developing new chemistry and getting sponsored research, then those negotiations would probably be a lot more contentious than our experience was.
And so what was their incentive for sponsoring the research then in the first place?
Information. So they were getting access to a new way of analyzing their products that they'd never been able to do before, because this was a unique, patented technology we developed. And so basically, we were giving them insights they'd never seen before, and that was in and of itself enough incentive for them to fund pretty substantial projects.
Yeah, but ultimately, they're a customer of this product, not a seller of this product.
Correct. Yeah, that's how it ended up working out. So interesting you mentioned that. So we would do these projects, and several times, we'd show them all these great insights, because what we do, just very quickly, is we have technology that can in real time monitor polymer processes. So we can actually track reactions and see properties of materials during synthesis, which no one can do today. You have to do a lot of offline testing, and it's super cumbersome. So we were giving them all this information, and we'd get to the end of these projects and they'd say, "That's awesome, really great. It really has helped us with this, new product or whatever we're working on. We would really love to have one of these in our lab or in our factory. Can you build one?" And so then we were like, "Well, we're a university. We don't really build instruments." And so you get that question enough times, that is enough of a incentive to say, well, maybe there's a business opportunity here.
That's really cool. And what I love is also that at age 23 or something like that, this is, you're sitting around the table involved in these types of discussions.
Yeah, trial by fire for sure. Knowing what I know now, after a lot of work in the space, I think if I knew how challenging all these things would be, I might have been scared off. But I didn't, and I was very fortunate to have the great mentors and learn from a lot of great people, and just work my butt off on it.
And can I ask why you didn't pursue a more technical degree originally? I mean, you were a business guy that then now you're a technology entrepreneur. You're steeped in technology, but was there a reason you chose to go a different path? I think I saw you studied Latin American studies or something like that.
Yeah, economics and Latin American studies. So that's an interesting question. So as I said, I started working in the lab early, and age 12, 13, I was hanging around my dad's lab and learning how to run instruments and stuff. And I realized that I didn't really want to be a scientist or an engineer. I loved the science, I loved the engineering, and frankly, I've learned quite a bit about it. And but I didn't really enjoy I didn't like the idea of working in a lab the rest of my career, to be frank. So what I was looking for was where I could have the excitement and access to technology, but also the areas that I was more inclined and interested in, which was commercialization and building, a business. So that's how it came to be.
I think a lot of people, just as an aside, I think a lot of people share that that interest. They want to be involved in high tech stuff that really matters and is impactful, but they don't want to be at the bench doing tests and recording results and just kind of chipping away at it the way a researcher, what's required, I guess, for research and for laboratory work. And so I think it's always interesting how people get involved in this type of stuff, but not from the direction of the laboratory. But it sounded like, and this seems to be a theme across a lot of the people that I've interviewed, is that the grad student around the technology, or who's been working directly with the inventor, is really also a key piece of the puzzle. You need this person to kind of push. You need an Alex Reed, to push forward the commercialization and the business angle, and you also very much need that grad student to then kind of become the CTO and push the technology forward. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly, at least our experience, and similar to you, talking to other companies that have been successful with commercialization. It's very, and sometimes, I will say, there are scientists, engineers that are very, very business minded. So with the right mentorship and things, that role could actually be the same person, at least for a time. until, usually then you're forced to specialize because you can't do it all. But yeah, typically an entrepreneur, executive, or somebody that understands commercialization partnered up with a technologist, both need to be in the business full time. And if it's a university spin out, frequently the faculty member is more of an advisor. They're not going to leave a tenured role where they're doing other research and adding value in other ways to society. So they're advising. They're not going to join the business full time. It happens, but so you're right. You do need someone that understands the technology well enough in the day to day to be part of the venture.
And was your co-founder the CTO who was the grad student, right? I mean, was he? I mean, he's older than you at this point, I would imagine, right? At least a few years. Was he skeptical of your involvement at an early day, and did you have to overcome a bunch of hurdles in that respect?
Yes, I think he's 8-9 years older or so. I mean, at that point, everyone was older than me, and everyone had more experience than me. So he was certainly not the only one that was skeptical. And that's the interesting thing here is New Orleans is a relatively small technology market. Not a lot of people would probably think of it as somewhere where technology comes from, more Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest, right? But there are research institutions there, and there's some really good people working on cool stuff in New Orleans. So the flip side of that is, because it's such a small market, there's not a deep bench of people with a ton of experience in startups and commercializing hard tech out of a university around. So it was almost like a default, you got somebody willing to do it, you partner them up with some people that know what they're doing, and hope for the best. So there was a little bit of just, obviously trust and passion, trust from some of the key people, and also passion on my part, but also there wasn't anybody else there to take the reins. So
yeah, and I feel like that's the case for so many technologies at so many institutions. They're sitting on the shelf, and it's really a lack of a person, of really just a person like you who is willing to do the work to move it forward. And I mean, that's, the podcast is one thing, but in general, I mean, that's something I'm definitely trying to solve, is how do we get more people like you doing that? Because there really is quite a need. It's incredible.
Yeah, there's definitely a big opportunity if you could unlock a lot of that IP. And I've had conversations like this with some folks in tech transfer offices and people like yourself. If there was an easy way to mine and categorize all that IP into, viability, market size, risk factors, and then easily serve it up to people who want to go do the work to go, start a business, because that's going to suck up a lot of time and effort. It would be awesome, because I do think, you could start to move things forward even faster than we're seeing the pace of technology today.
I agree. And so it's the chairman that was brought in to kind of guide you in this commercialization effort, who was a known venture capitalist. His name is Bill, right?
Yeah, Bill Bottom.
So how early was he brought on, and what kind of stuff did you learn from him? I'm also curious to know what types of things you learned just from being exposed to your dad, who's a very impressive person in his own right. Just either growing up in the house or hanging around in the lab, sort of what kind of things did you learn by osmosis from him, and what did Bill bring to the table that was complementary or supplemental to some of that knowledge?
Yeah, great question. So growing up, both my parents are, PhD academics, right? So growing up, a lot of emphasis on education, a lot of emphasis on curiosity. I mean, I think just that scientific method that my dad uses, and, like most scientists, applied to daily life is almost the easiest way to synthesize that. So basically, I think that curiosity to know more, to learn, is critical for an entrepreneur, because there's so much you need to know and so little that that the ability to learn and find information and be passionate and excited about it I think is absolutely critical to developing as an entrepreneur. So I'd say that foundation, growing up in that household with that kind of an environment, set me up to then work with people like Bill and many, many others, too many to list, honestly, that I've learned things from. But Bill was there with me every step of the way from the very, very beginning. And I think you asked before about skeptics and stuff. He believed in me. And I think he knew that if he was working with me, he could help develop me to the point where, I wouldn't mess it up too bad. And so working with someone like Bill, just the amount of knowledge and information, someone that's done so many deals from the commercial angle, but is also like a PhD physicist in semiconductors. So he had the technology, he had the business. I learned, so much from him in those early years. And so, and frankly, the confidence from him, from having someone like him believe in me that early, was huge. So I think hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, are there any kind of glaring mistakes or errors that you made early on that come to mind? Just something that you think was so easily avoidable? I'm always curious about that.
Too many to list. I think, and the interesting part is we avoided probably 2 or 3 times as many just because of having someone like Bill and other people involved. So there's always mistakes made. I will say with someone like Bill, a lot of our mistakes were less on the I would say the technology, the commercial side, because I think we had a lot of that covered working our deals as we did. But as a young entrepreneur, I think the most difficult lessons to learn are always around people. I think getting the right team, getting the right people in place to drive ventures forward is absolutely critical, and one of the hardest things to do right, even for experienced people. So those are where my biggest lessons were, like you said, where mistakes were made that I had to learn and continue to grow.
And so at what point did you guys bring in Bill? You mentioned that, you and your dad saw potential in this, said, let's do a company. You started to work the SBIR angle. Did Bill come in tandem with that, or let's talk about some of the early days in getting this thing capitalized?
So he was actually on the advisory board of that research center, along with a number of other local and national business people that were in the industry or in tangential industries. So there was a lot of interest in commercialization pre-company. So Bill's on the board, or now he's emeritus, but he was on the board of Tulane at the time of the university. And the university was very interested in doing more of this type of activity. So I think he jumped in at the advisory board, and then when I was there saying we wanted to do a company, he was already there and said, absolutely, let's do it, I'll help you. And he jumped on from the very beginning. And like I said, so then we started to look at SBIR and other ways. Those are fairly long cycles and lower probabilities to get funded initially. So we did some of those. We ended up getting one for actually a different technology that we sell into the biopharma space. But the early funding came from a joint development agreement with a customer. So we negotiated a deal with a large multinational chemical company that had a facility about 45 minutes from the university. And the plant manager was someone interested in what we were doing. And they had a lot of issues not seeing what was happening in their reactors to optimize production. So they said, well, why don't we work with you guys to build the first generation of this product and put it in our plant? So that was, we said, early capitalization that came directly from customers. Then we got SBIR, then we raised some initial seed funding. So then all of a sudden we had a number of sources of capital early to get us off the ground.
And I love that when customers fund early iterations of things. I mean, their incentive was, again, they were just experiencing this problem. It was a pain point, and they thought that your product might be able to solve that. I just think that that's always a great piece of validation for a young company, right? Is when the customers actually are putting money down to see the solution. How early did you begin talking to these industrial partners, customers? I mean, and maybe you could talk about the importance of that and how you went about doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we were, as I mentioned before, so a lot of these companies were funding research already. So first we were trying to get SBIR, as I said before. We'd gone through a couple cycles and didn't get funding initially. So then we said, well, we have these people that have been asking us. And so I just started talking to them saying, well, what if we did some kind of joint development to get this in your plant? And we had two companies interested in doing that, ended up with one. So really it was just mining the network of the companies that were already interested in the technology and already funding it through the university, and say, look, we got all this stuff with the research, let's go apply it. So at the time, it felt like a natural leap and conversation, but it might not have been intuitive for a lot of people to go do that. And again, that was a lot of Bill's suggestion early. Is like, we have these customers, why don't so working with him on the strategy was a big piece to get that early deal done.
And presumably you also had to work with the university and the tech transfer office. I mean, was there already an agreement in place with the Poly lab that covered commercialization, and did you have to carve out anything specific, some type of licensing deal because for the company? Please, anything you can tell us about that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, the company was a separate entity from the university. The research center was actually part of the university as a nonprofit research center. So all of the IP was owned by the university already. So indeed, we did have to go negotiate with the technology transfer office and some of the folks there to get that license deal done. So initially what we did was we did an option on the IP for, I forgot, 6-12 months, something like that, while we negotiated the terms of the full license. And in the meantime, when we had the option, it was when we started to negotiate the contract with the customer, do it SBIR. So we were obviously in parallel looking for funding while we negotiated that license. There isn't maybe that's changed now, but there isn't really like a set formula or standard approach on how to handle licensing the startups out of a university. So there was a lot of learning on both sides of that deal. In the end, our tech transfer office really wants as much technology to spin out of the university as possible and be commercialized. So they've been very supportive and helped us along the way to get the technology out there.
And do you have a deal for future technology that continues to be invented in the lab that you can kind of consume with the company that exists?
Yeah, so we have rights around that, similar to what we would do with the petrochemical and pharma companies. So around the technology and the patent estate, we do have rights of anything that gets developed that we have a first refusal on it. And then we've actually developed quite a bit of our own IP since the spin out. some of it co-owned with the university, some of it solely owned by the company. So yeah, we have an agreement to handle IP between both entities.
Yeah, I feel like that's a touchy subject, and also a testament to the fact that the team, it's not necessarily about team. It's not necessarily about technology, but it is a lot about team. It's great to hear that, you know, your team is continuing to develop technology that's completely independent of the laboratory and the original technology that was developed. And the license agreement, I mean, how much, you don't have to say detail, anything that's confidential, you know, feel free to exclude, but how much of the funding from the industry partner was required? Like, how much funding did you need to unlock in order to make that license a reality? Was there a down payment on it so that you could, you know, take the get the patent, the IP assigned to you, or so you would have had to come up with that money in no matter what, either from an investor or from the customer? You know, I guess how critical was that initial customer funding and SBIR funding to the original formation of the company?
Yeah, each of these deals is obviously very different. In this case, I think the SBIR, the customer funding, the things that we had done to generate interest gave a lot of credibility to what we were doing and the approach. So our conversations with the tech transfer office were more around, you know, aligning interests on milestones, what it will look like in the future. So some deals, like you said, that might have large upfront payments, things like that. In this case, you know, Tulane was definitely very supportive, and so we aligned around, you know, a set of milestones for each technology that were going to be the guide for, you know, showing progress for the license.
And so, and maybe you could tell us a bit about the trajectory, I guess more of the, I mean, you've raised some money, you have, I think, 25 people working for you. Tell us a bit more about the trajectory, you know, from those modest beginnings and how it's become, you know, what Fluence Analytics is today. You went through a rebrand. I mean, let's hear the bio, I guess, of the company.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, you got the cast of characters earlier with the founding team, and then yeah, we built it out in New Orleans for quite a while. A lot of our early work was, as you heard, you know, customer funded, a little bit of, you know, friends and family type investment, but mainly customers and grants. And we didn't go raise any institutional capital until April of 2017. And that's when Energy Innovation Capital came in. They're one of the premier energy investors in this venture space. And so they came in, and that really helped accelerate. So up to that point, it was a lot of, as you know, with technology that comes out of a lab, there's a lot of additional development required, prototyping, testing. So those first years were, you know, getting the units tested at customer site, getting that initial data, those initial proof points that would then set the foundation for what we would effectively call our first generation of real products post funding. And so then it was more of a commercial push, you know, driving the market interest, finding all of the application markets, because what we do, there's just a whole, yeah, everything from commodity materials used in construction and packaging and cars, all the way to very specialized high value products used in semiconductors or life science, whatever. So there's very different approaches to communicating a value proposition to each of those markets. And so we had to learn quite a bit about the commercial aspects, pushing the technology, pushing the products, and getting it out there. So that was really the ramp up phase. And then, you know, we had along the way, we brought in some strategic investors, Mitsubishi Chemical out of Japan, JSR Corporation out of Japan, And then recently we brought in Yokogawa. So we found a very technology-focused group of investors in Japan for this. And then we also moved the company headquarters to Texas, to Houston. So just an order of magnitude of more activity, the talent pool. There's a number of factors. We did retain some ties with the university and R&D activity in New Orleans. So now basically we're poised for our next phase of growth, set up in the Houston area. Obviously, in the middle of that, we had a pandemic, which was a very interesting time, but we were able to get through actually fairly well. And now, we're seeing a huge amount of market interest, a lot of pent up demand. So our pipeline is pretty significant, and we'll be launching some new products this year. Actually, I think we had a press release this morning for one of our life science products. So, we're rocking and rolling. We got the right team in place. We're well capitalized and looking to scale.
And I get, well, this is a good opportunity. I mean, are there roles that you're hiring for, things that PhDs and grad students that might be listening could be interested in?
Yeah. I mean, I think, we always are interested in good people. So we do encourage people to submit resumes, and sometimes as things come up, we'll have specific roles. But right now we're focused really on the scaling piece. So field engineering, applications engineering, so things that are focused on getting product out and working with customers are the areas we're hiring most in now. And actually on the software side. So we're building out quite a bit on our software side. And so we're hiring there as well.
And so how long was it until your first commercial product? It sounds like it was 5 or 6 years, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, so the early generations of what we were doing, they were commercial. They were in the field generating value, but we launched, like I said, and that next generation of our truly first ones that we would make a number of, so to speak, in that 2017 timeframe. So 3-4 years of iteration around early generations of the product. And a lot of that was due to the fact that we were operating extremely lean. So we didn't raise any institutional money. It was all cash flow grants. So that adds quite a bit of time to get things done because you're doing it on a shoestring budget. So I think if there is one lesson, we probably could have accelerated some of that with more capital earlier on as we built out our team. So, that's one of those balancing acts of trying to make as much progress as possible before taking on, significant dilution versus, taking it on to move faster. So those are the strategic decisions as an entrepreneur that, you always have to wrestle with. So that was definitely a lot of effort in those first years.
And what's your approach to those types of decisions? I mean, is there any kind of system that you use, or I mean, you're assessing each thing as it comes? I mean, any kind of mental models or distilled ideas that you've gained and honed out of that?
I wish it was that scientific. I think it's more depending on the type of decision and the type of experience that I have access to. So maybe that's the mental model, is going to find where I can get the most information the quickest to help make a decision. So that's really, as an entrepreneur, startup CEO, the job is to make a lot of decisions as quickly as you can with very incomplete data sets. So getting as much data as you can before you make a decision is always best. And then since then, I've learned quite a bit about, delaying a little bit on some decisions, taking a little more time to think through and actually, rather than just pure speed, start to think through, what the best course is. So then there's a little more optimization, but I think it really depends on the stage you're at and what you're trying to get done.
And are there any resources, or I know like a lot of people mention the NSF I-Core program. I mean, are there any other resources, books, anything that comes to mind that helped you along the way, besides obviously having Bill's ear, or and being able to consult him? I mean, anything else that really helped you figure out what to do and when?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, so we had there was something called the Idea Village in New Orleans. So it's a business accelerator. There was also the New Orleans Bioinnovation Center that had a commercialization team. We worked with a lot of interns that did a lot of research stuff for us. So we leveraged every single resource we had access to make progress. And I think, that's a great question, is, you never know where the resources are. And coming out of a university, especially, an excellent research institution like Tulane, the network you have through the alumni is also tremendous. And so I think that's the other part of it as an entrepreneur, is to think creatively about who you have access to and what knowledge you can get through all those channels and leverage them. So that was big. And everyone reads a lot of books. I remember one of the first ones I read was The Hard Thing About Hard Things. It's Ben Horowitz. So that one was interesting because it walked through just the true miserable experience of doing a startup and how hard it can be, if things don't go the right way, but persevering in the end. And so stuff like that, talking to other entrepreneurs, getting those stories that, it's not easy. It's not what you see in the news. It's like, oh yeah, you do a little bit of work and all of a sudden, you're Elon Musk. That's just not the reality. And so the more you can embrace that and learn to not, sometimes enjoy it because you're growing, I think the faster you'll be able to develop.
And what was the hardest or lowest moment in the process, if you can think back to it? Have you had any? I'm sure a lot. I mean, anything that comes to the top of your mind?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch, and that's part of the roller coaster, right? Is being able to. I always was able to bounce back within 24 hours of any major thing that would normally be like a horrible setback, right? So basically, you just wake up the next day and it's a new day. So there was a lot of that. Deals taking a long time, or fundraising is always hard, especially your first round. Hiring, firing. So there's always going to be very, very challenging moments and decisions that are going to have to be made. So I think more important than focusing on the lows is how you bounce back to wake up and do it all over again.
And what do you do? I mean, do you do anything specific to reset, or you just kind of make a mental decision that I'm going to let this, simmer for one day, and then tomorrow will be completely different?
It was, I mean, a lot of it initially was just, forget and move on. So simmer, and then, wake up and it's, new day, new opportunity. Over time, I've done a lot more, so like meditation and things like that help a lot with that process. So initially it was just the young energy to keep plowing through, and then eventually, you got to work in some more practical approaches to sustaining it.
And not to backtrack, but I did want to ask a little bit about this. So when you first started capitalizing the company, you're trying to get SBIR grants. The friends and family money that you raised, I mean, was that to help round out the research, or was that to complement any SBIR with with funding so that you could pay for salaries, pay yourself? I mean, how did you manage and budget at that stage? What's critical? I mean, what can you allocate for yourself and for, business development efforts, and how do you kind of build that budget?
Yeah, so if you're doing what we did, stuff with joint development and grants, you can't just use that money for everything, as you noted. But a business needs to have all the functions you said. So, business development, and then you're gonna have to fundraise, and then you're gonna have to probably travel if you're in a place, like New Orleans, where you're not gonna have access to capital. I mean, if you're already in a location where you have easier access to capital and customers, that helps a lot on time and money. The flip side is it's probably a very expensive place to be because you're probably on a coast. So that was one of the advantages we had. It was much lower cost to run a business in some ways in New Orleans. The higher costs come later as you try to scale, and you need certain types of roles or people. But initially, it's a great place to start a business. And then, so you do have to plan for those things. And you're right, SBIR and some of these programs allow you to have matching funds to unlock additional funds to do things. So most of it was going into the product development and the research. And then, as an entrepreneur, I was, drawing very, very low, very, very below market salaries for almost the entire existence of the company. So on my end, that was it, try to get paid last. So I think especially early, making sure that you have the right team is more important, because presumably you have a larger equity position. As you start to bring in investors and take dilution and things like that, then I think those are opportunities to get to closer to market or market, depending on your location, so that you don't have to worry about day-to-day expenses and things and stuff like that.
And how did you know the product was ready for you to go out and raise that institutional round? I mean, I guess in 2017, you probably had started working on that round in 2015 or something like that. I mean, when did you know that it was time to kind of go in and inject fuel into this thing? And also, as a corollary to that, like, when did you feel like this thing was really working? I'm also curious to hear about that.
Well, I mean, when we had the validation from the customers showing the value,
pretty early on.
Yeah, we had the initial proof very early. So we showed it worked, and we showed that it delivered the value that they were expecting. So that was exciting.
Just to tease that point out, it really continues to just underscore the importance of talking to customers at a very early stage.
Yeah, there was another great book, and I mean, everyone or a lot of people know Lean Startup, and you mentioned iCore. I think they've taken a lot of stuff from that, and Steve Blank's the 4 steps of the Epiphany. So that's another great approach. We were doing it kind of intuitively in some ways because of the advice we were getting, but it is a very well documented formula that's distilled into something that you can execute as an entrepreneur. Yeah, talking to as many customers as possible, as early as possible. And that's another thing I'd do a lot more of now. If I had to start over, we did that a lot. I would do even more to understand the best markets to go after first and things like that. So a lot of it was, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I mean, a lot of like the Lean Startup methodology, a lot of people think that stuff is reserved for software, where you have users and, nobody's going to necessarily kind of steal your idea, and there's less secrecy around the intellectual property, but it's really not the case. With hardware, you absolutely have to get in front of these guys because they could be your customer. They can tell you you're poking around in the complete wrong space. I mean, they're experts, and they're experts with the problem, I guess, right?
Absolutely. Now, I would say, actually, if you're going to do a hardware or hard tech, whatever people, whatever you're doing, energy, that's going to have a long cycle.
Deep tech, hard science, whatever. Whatever the buzzword is. Yeah.
So if you're doing something like that, it's going to take you a lot longer and a lot more time and money and effort. So in fact, you should absolutely do that first step even more so than on the software side. Software, you can experiment almost as you go with the product. You know, you could put out an MVP. It's very hard to put out an MVP on some of these things with hardware, at least, you know, timeline and effort. So I would say 100%, you better get out there and talk to customers first, or you could burn 5-10 years without, if you get maybe it's 5 years instead of 1 or 2 with just a pure software play. So it definitely is worth it.
And so you mentioned that as something that you would have done differently, is even talking to more customers. It sounds like maybe the first vertical or application that you considered might have been a little different had you been doing that more, you know, even more. Is there anything else that you would do differently, knowing what you know now?
That's a very loaded. Yeah, it's a lot of things. But
just the first couple of major examples. I'm sure everything to some extent, but yeah, but anything that comes to mind, just that, you know, for us to learn from your, you know, the trial by fire, as you put it, that you went through. So, you know, maybe there's mistakes in there that some of us out here can avoid.
Yeah, and some of it, unfortunately, you probably will not be able to avoid because you got to go experience it just to learn it the hard way. But most of it, as I said before, is really around the people, the culture side of things, because you can have the best technology, you can have funding, but you really need a team that can execute. So you need really good people. And then the first point, which is the key one, is you better be going after a viable market. So we knew that, thankfully. There's just probably, like you said, ways we could have grown faster if we might have targeted different verticals, because we had so many to choose from, and we still do. But I think the key is knowing that you're going after a good market, but really have a team that can pull together, go through those ups and downs, and be complementary to get through that. So building that team, I'd say those are the areas where now I know a lot more about how to build a team like that. And you know, you have help, but you don't really know until you make some wrong decisions. So that I think is probably the biggest area, and there's a lot of subsections to that. But
is there any one subsection that you can say, like something that you learned that is the best way to build a team, something to keep in mind, you know, anything like that?
I think, yeah, I mean, part of it is you learn, if you can very clearly identify values and, you know, specific behaviors and traits that you're looking for, you know, things that'll make someone successful in a startup, right? I think if you can clearly know that going in, and I've adjusted a lot of how I try to suss that out. So I'd say if you know that, then you'll know you can pick people that will be a fit to work in a startup. Because I mean, a lot of scientists and engineers, especially if you're in a company like this, they don't like constant change. You know, they like to execute on specific paths. So you need types of people who are extremely adaptable to roll with the punches that the business is gonna experience. So I'd say, yeah, just having clear values and sticking to those as you select people. So initially, I didn't even think about that. I looked purely just for talent, and we've had awesome people work at our company and still do. So number 2 is more fit. You know, so you can have all the talent you want, but if they can't work together, then you're gonna have a problem. So that's the part I'm talking about that I ignored initially.
Well, yeah, and the adaptability. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to begin in trying to assess that from someone. It sounds difficult.
It's very difficult, and part of it is you just kind of get some pattern recognition after you've made some mistakes. You're like, yeah, that's a red flag. I think, you know, but there's definitely ways you could probe and check those things out.
any advice that you would want to give, that you can give to grad students, PhDs, and entrepreneurs out there that are listening to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was in what we talked about, Max. It was get a mentor if you've never done it before, which if you're a grad student or early entrepreneur probably haven't or have limited experience. So go find as many people that did it and did it well that you can learn from. I think we talked a little bit about learning. So be willing, ready, and excited about learning and getting way out of your comfort zone and living out of your comfort zone, because that's where you'll be for a very, very long time. And find resources, talk to customers. I mean, all that advice, I think we covered it all. Those are all the things that, going in, I would definitely want to hear. Like, how do I give myself at least the best probability to succeed? Because baseline, you got to work really hard and you got to be smart and you got to have good technology, right? So that's just the ticket to play. So the other things are the market, the people, all that stuff. That's where the more you can apply these things, the higher your likelihood or probability of success would be.
Well, that's great, Alex. I really appreciate it. I think it's a good place to wrap up. Where can people find you if they want to reach out? How do you like to be contacted?
I'm on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn's usually the best way to find me.
Okay. Well, Alex Reed, Fluence Analytics. I really appreciate you taking the time.
This was awesome, Max. Thank you.
And just everyone visit bountiful.work, WORK, to join our community. And thank you for listening. Alex, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening. But now we need your help. We're building a community of scientists, students, entrepreneurs, industry leaders, and investors to commercialize meaningful technology and research. Join us at bountiful.work today to find opportunities and realize your power to save the world.